let's talk about the quote unquote tactical athlete. Let's talk about the term, but let's also, what I want to do is define like what is an athlete, right? And how does that relate to population specific that we're working with?
Well, I think we should talk about not necessarily defining tactical athletes, be what are we defining the people we are going after and working from an IEP perspective.
Perfect.
Because we do not want to call them tactical athletes.
Yeah, but I think we need to define what maybe is used out in the community too, though.
Yeah, it's
separate them out so we can be clarifying.
Common term.
Didn't he have on the very first podcast a really good athlete definition? Wasn't it you?
Yeah, my definition of an athlete is someone who can learn a skill and perform that skill proficiently. Learn a skill quickly and then perform it pretty close or as close to the standard as possible. So they're very, whatever it may be that you think of somebody who's athletic, it's like, oh, that guy's an athlete. It's because the first time he's like a natural at, it's because he can perform it super, super well, or at least close to that skill that he just learned.
So you just said perform. You said perform, right? And I think does being able to measure that performance, does that fit in here somewhere? I don't know if it does or not. I'm asking, like, for the group, like,
I mean, you have to measure it against something,
how do you define whether or not you performed or didn't perform?
See, I define an athlete as someone who performs something. Like
that's why I asked.
It has to be a part of the definition. I love your definition, but I think it needs to be below bullet point.
I would add performs well.
Okay.
Yeah,
because like anybody can perform something, but like you can run and look like a pterodactyl trying to take off.
See, the problem is I still call them an athlete. Even a bad athlete.
Well, they are bad. Yeah, you could.
So
be bad
that's I think maybe the next level.
Yeah, you put indicators on.
How does this? Yes,
Good,
like does this relate
there's
to
a spectrum of standard.
An individual performance, and what are you comparing that to? Your own or to somebody else, or is this part of a team? And how does that help or hurt your performance or your ability as an athlete? Help or hurt the performance of the team. So I think there's a couple different ways to look at it. Because to your point, like, okay, they're still an athlete, they're just not very good, right? Like, because I've heard people argue like everyone's an athlete. There's an athlete in everyone.
I mean, I played college ball, but I never started. I was a bad athlete, but I was an athlete.
Right. So that's that point. I think this is the confusing part. I mean,
it's what makes it difficult. Yeah, that's why it's not an easy just definition. That's why I think it gets bastardized as we start trying to move it around to different industries. We change the name and it's like, hang on a second.
So we have to put things like tactical athlete in front of things, or football athlete, soccer athlete, whatever. Like,
nobody says
sport athlete or tactical.
No, but somehow
athlete, I think it's pretty.
Somehow it came out that tactical athlete is a thing. Yeah. So when we should be looking at it as like these people are athletes. I don't know where the tactical thing came in from, but my guess is it's like, well, you make your living with a gun, right? So, and I'm sure it probably came specifically from the military side of the house with regard to what is tactical or what isn't. But you would have to break this. We could go on for days about breaking down like what is tactical. Like the clothes you wear, does that make you tactical? Right? The camo that you're wearing, is that tactical or not tactical?
I mean,
right? Is the kit you're wearing?
I've seen EMTs and firefighters get lumped into tactical athletes.
Yeah, I think what we're talking about is like first responders and professionals that do have to perform on demand. And I'm okay calling it so sort of like tactical athlete at some level if it means that somebody can draw a connection to it. So what are you talking about? So if somebody asked me like what IEP is, well, what do you do? Right? Well, we provide human performance programming and instruction to who? Right. And so you would have to say like law enforcement professionals. Well, but then what does that mean? Yeah. Like who?
See, I feel like even that, like my knee-jerk reaction is tactile community.
So
like, I'm not going to be like athlete. And I mean, I'll be the first one to step out there, I guess. I am not a big fan of tactical athlete. I think it was done by I think there's been multiple people or entities that have used it. I think there's one very specific one in the strength and conditioning community that is designed curriculum around giving people specific certifications that is focused on the tactical industry, and they had to call it something. Maybe I'm being critical, but I think for the majority of it, it's like, no, it's just a training to be an athlete. It's teaching to be an athlete. Be a coach and teach an athlete. We train the tactical community
how to be athletes,
right? Yeah. Not trying to separate these out into just defining different names. Now, okay, and there's part of me, it's like, who gives a shit? Call it whatever you want, as long as you're good at it.
That's kind of where I'm at.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. I'm like, is it wrong?
Yeah,
No.
yeah, exactly.
No.
But
exactly.
like, I think we approached it. We all put our heads together, and I don't know who came up in this group. It's probably Aaron, and probably was like, I want to call it an athlete, and we all kind of like, yeah, that makes sense.
No. It was in the free PDF thing we were talking on.
Oh, check.
And I literally said, are we trying to push it in the community? I think it was Scott. Yeah. Are we trying to push it in the community towards athlete or towards, like, do we need the whole like tactical, whatever attached to it? And Scott was like, we're just trying to do that. And I was like, that is I dig it. Mm-hmm. And I think 100%. I agree with it.
It worked perfect with like the intention of the course. We're trying to teach people athletic movement. Mm-hmm. So
yes, that's a good one. And I think we even need to go a little deeper on that because I think that one of the common themes I hear, at least, you can't train someone to be more athletic. Like it's you either got it or you don't.
You suck as a coach if that's your excuse.
And I agree. Well, and I don't normally hear it from other coaches. Well, maybe I do hear it from coaches, but I think you hear it from people, sometimes the consumer, frankly. There are things we can isolate skills that are going to increase your athletic performance.
We'll acknowledge there's limitations.
Sure,
right?
absolutely.
But you can't.
Some people have a higher ceiling than others if you're more gifted athletically.
Right. I'm out racing Usain Bolt.
No.
It's unlikely.
But you're still
highly
athletic.
Highly unlikely. Get a rocket strapped to your ass? Maybe.
Yeah. So I think the next part of this is like, okay, so we've kind of talked about that. And obviously there's a lot of conjecture, right, in this community of how to refer to things. But I think it's generally accepted that tactical athlete is like a generally accepted word or term, right? Because it sort of identifies, again, going back to like what makes it that way. I don't want to go down that path, but people can make this kind of connection to when you say that general population you're talking about. But I think the next part of it is like how does a person within that community, whether tactical is in front of it or not, right? In that community, how do they identify? Do they identify themselves as an athlete? And if so, at what level, right? And again, like going back to the identifying, how do you self-identify? I think this is the next part of the question. Like let's just say police officers, do they recognize themselves or identify as athletes? And if they do, how do they do that? And if they don't, why don't they? And so maybe that's the next question. There's two questions there. In your experiences, do they, and again, a lot of this gets handled in the TPL course, right up front. What's the general reaction to this? Is it kind of heads cocked to the side? Like, is it like disagreement, agreement? Like, how do people respond?
I'd say 50-50. You have some of the older mindset who don't consider it. They just completely want to separate themselves and like
the job.
We're different.
Right.
And then there's other people that can make the connections. They're more the growth mindset focused and they can see like, oh yeah, this is how this applies. I can see how this needs to be put here and I need to train this way to make myself better in this point. I think it's just, I would say 50-50.
I think that's a good guess. One thing I'm going to not disagree with, but clarify a little bit. The older population, I don't think it's specifically that they're trying to fight it. Some do, but I think there's some young that fight it too. But I think it's more, this is a newer concept.
It's new.
Yeah. And so I think it's education from our side of teaching that, and it's almost self-identifying. It's like, oh wow, oh okay, I do see what they're saying, and it may feel foreign to them, and we have to work through that, I think. But I agree with Aaron. I think that there is some make that connection quicker than others. However, I would say that I think that a lot of people don't self-identify it just naturally. I think when we come in and we discuss it or we inform, there are those that are like, I see what they're saying. It's like a light bulb moment. And then there's some, that's what I'm saying. I think the other 50, at least that I would say, is kind of like, okay, I need to talk through that one a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that they're resistant to it. They're just unsure.
Yeah. And again, that's where the education side comes in. But I think that the way we teach it, the way we describe it, especially from a human performance standpoint, like it's really hard to argue with when we start looking at all the different intricate pieces and job, things that they have to do for their job, but especially when it comes to movement and strength and power and endurance, they're like, okay, yeah, that's pretty hard to argue with that we're not athletes.
So right? I'm gonna jump in here, like with all the body cam footage, the CCTV, the cell phone footage that we see out there. I don't care who you are, you can look at this and, well, maybe that's a little bit of a broad statement. I take that back. I think most people can look at that and they see what's happening on film, right? And let's say there's an altercation where it turns into a hand-to-hand type of thing, or we're getting into a wrestling match where we're trying to put somebody into custody, right? I've never done this. I'm never going to do it. I've had some jiu-jitsu, done some grappling, done some boxing, some Muay Thai. I kind of understand the things, but you're looking at it happening on screen. You don't have to be a human performance coach to look at that and go, that looks really, something's up, like that person is not an athlete. That is not very athletic.
Right.
And that could be separated from, this person is very overweight, right? And so as a result of that, they might be moving fairly well, but they're limited because they're deconditioned and they're very overweight or whatever else. But there's also, you've seen some people out there, like I've seen some athletes, right? Just turn on the TV on Sunday afternoon and you look at some dudes that are a little overweight, right? And they're they can move better than I'll ever move, right? And they're super powerful, they're super strong, they're quick, they're agile. There's all of those things. So there's a definition there between that's not athletic versus you could be in better condition or be better shape.
Right.
So, looking at it, like, again, I think if you step back and you look at it, who tends to do better in the end? The athlete, right? Even if they don't have a lot of skill, right, with regard to whatever. Again, I was saying like the jiu-jitsu, the wrestling match, the grappling, or whatever that happens to be going on there. The better athlete usually can maybe survive a little bit longer. When we're talking about hand-to-hand, I'm not adding like if there's weapons are involved or whatever there, but I think they have the tendency to go longer and do better. I don't think we can argue that, whether that's running and chasing somebody, whether that's the wrestling match, whether that's the having to backpedal and get out of a certain situation or whatever else. Like, I don't think you can argue that athleticism is an important part of this job, no matter where you fall into it. And I'll argue that all day long. Being from that community, it doesn't matter. Like, let's debate it.
I mean, it's subjective. I guess that's not true. I guess it is subjective. I think you could make it objective, and I think if we did subjective reporting, regardless, I think very clearly, if you don't see that, feel free to reach out to us and we'll have that conversation. There's a lot of people marketing, I am a coach for tactical athletes. I would highly caution you to make sure that when you're looking at those people, do they actually understand your industry? And they're not just using the buzzword tactical athlete. Because that is one of my concerns right now. The more and more I see it, is that coach understand your profession? Is that coach in your profession and not actually an expert? That word is being used so often. And I think, again, it's not what we're trying to define and push back on, but we're trying to be very clear. It's just an athlete. You need a coach that's going to make you a better athlete. Make sure whoever that is actually is an expert to help you do that for your job.
Yeah. I want to end with this disclaimer, right? So we aren't saying like using the word tactical in front of an athlete is wrong.
Right.
We're just saying that's not the route we're going to go. I'm not going to point fingers. You do what you want. And the disclaimer I want to say is I coach for a sport that is the tactical games. Now, I've won that now 2 years. Jake, am I tactical? Just answer yes or no question, okay, Jake? You don't have to laugh.
Very strong no.
No.
You are not tactical.
I'm not tactical.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I refer to everyone in that sport as an athlete. Do I think the name is wrong for the sport? Absolutely not. It's already stuck. It's like my morning mono program was named morning mono, but you do it in the afternoon and sometimes it's not monostructural. Like the name is there. The branding already exists. We have athletes. We do things. I sometimes don't necessarily agree with the word tactical, but it's not wrong. We're just not the route that we four have decided because of, God bless him, because of Scott coming up with that, because of what Scott said, we should call them athletes. And that's when I program on the side for the tactical games, I personally call them athletes because that's what they are. Because I know that I personally am not, unfortunately, tactical.
You're not.